The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Windsor Castle, as Captain James Morrison adjusted his red uniform for what he didn't yet know would be the last time. For 15 years he had served the royal family with unwavering dedication, but today felt different. There was tension in the air that even the ancient stone walls seemed to absorb. Prince George, now 12 years old, had grown from the cheerful toddler James once watched take his first wobbly steps in these very gardens. The boy had always been special, not just because of his royal blood, but because of his genuine kindness and curious nature. James had watched him comfort crying children during public events, ask thoughtful questions about the guards' families, and show respect to everyone from kitchen staff to visiting dignitaries. That Tuesday morning started like any other. James conducted the morning inspection, checked security protocols, and briefed his team about the day's schedule. Prince George was expected to attend a private tutoring session, followed by a family lunch. Nothing seemed unusual until James noticed the young prince sitting alone in the rose garden, staring at his hands with an expression far too serious for a 12-year-old. James had always maintained proper distance. It was part of his training and duty. But something about the boy's posture, the way his small shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, made the seasoned guard pause. In his 15 years of service, James had learned to read the subtle signs of distress in royal family members. They were, after all, still human beings beneath the titles and expectations. As protocol dictated, James remained at his post, but his eyes kept drifting to the young prince. The boy sat there for nearly an hour, occasionally picking up a small pebble and tossing it gently toward the fountain. It was unlike George, who was usually energetic and eager to share stories about his lessons or ask James about his military service. The castle staff moved about their duties with practiced efficiency, but James noticed that even they seemed to sense something was different. The usual cheerful chatter was more subdued, and several staff members glanced toward the rose garden with concerned expressions. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper who had been at the castle for over 30 years, stopped beside James briefly. "The young prince has been quieter than usual lately," she whispered, her voice filled with the kind of maternal concern that transcended royal protocols. "Yesterday I found him reading in the library until well past his bedtime. When I gently reminded him it was time to sleep, he looked at me with such serious eyes and said, 'Mrs. Henderson, do you think children should always do what adults expect of them, even when it feels wrong?'" James felt a chill run down his spine. In his years of service, he had witnessed the pressures that came with royal life, the constant scrutiny, the endless expectations, the way every action was analyzed and judged. But Prince George was still just a child, and the weight of future kingship seemed to be settling on his young shoulders earlier than anyone had anticipated. The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Prince George approached James directly, something that rarely happened during official duty hours. The boy's usual bright smile was replaced by a contemplative expression that seemed far too mature for his age. "Captain Morrison," George said, his voice steady but quiet. "May I ask you something?" James straightened to attention but softened his expression. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. Have you ever had to make a decision that you knew would disappoint people you care about, but you also knew it was the right thing to do?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. James had faced many difficult situations in his military career before joining the Royal Guard, but the depth and complexity of the 12-year-old's question caught him off guard. This wasn't a child asking about trivial matters. This was a young person grappling with something significant. "Yes, Your Highness," James replied carefully. "There have been times when doing the right thing meant facing disappointment from others. It's one of the most difficult parts of growing up, learning that sometimes being true to your principles requires courage." Prince George nodded slowly, as if James had confirmed something he already suspected. "Thank you, Captain. That helps me understand something important." As the day progressed, James couldn't shake the feeling that this conversation was more significant than it appeared. The prince's question suggested he was facing a decision, but what kind of decision could a 12-year-old prince be contemplating that would require such serious consideration? The answer would come sooner than James expected, and it would change everything he thought he knew about duty, respect, and the true meaning of honor. The young prince's quiet determination was building towards something that would resonate far beyond the castle walls, touching the heart of a seasoned guard who had dedicated his life to serving the crown. That evening, as James completed his final rounds, he noticed a light still burning in Prince George's study. The boy was awake, likely wrestling with whatever decision had been weighing on his mind. Little did James know that by tomorrow, that decision would set in motion a chain of events that would test the very foundations of duty, respect, and personal integrity that had guided his entire career. The next morning arrived with unusual activity in the castle. James noticed immediately that something had shifted overnight. The normal rhythm of royal life seemed disrupted, with staff members whispering in small groups and several senior advisors arriving earlier than scheduled. The atmosphere felt charged with anticipation and concern. Prince George appeared for breakfast looking determined but pale. He moved with purpose through the morning routine, but James could see the nervous energy beneath his composed exterior. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he straightened his school tie, and he kept glancing toward the main corridor as if expecting someone important to arrive. Around 10 o'clock, the reason for the unusual atmosphere became clear. Prince William and Catherine arrived unexpectedly, their faces showing a mixture of pride and worry that only parents could display. They were followed by several senior members of the royal household, including the private secretary and 2 education advisors who rarely visited the castle on weekdays. James maintained his position but couldn't help overhearing fragments of conversation as the group gathered in the blue drawing room. Words like unprecedented, careful consideration, and long-term implications drifted through the partially open door. Whatever Prince George had decided, it was significant enough to warrant an emergency family meeting. The young prince was called into the meeting, and James watched him walk with the steady gait of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. There was no hesitation in his step, no looking back. At 12 years old, Prince George was displaying the kind of quiet courage that James had only seen in seasoned soldiers facing crucial missions. For nearly 2 hours, voices rose and fell behind the closed doors. James could hear the passionate but respectful tones of family discussion, questions being asked, explanations being given, concerns being raised. At one point he heard Prince George's clear, young voice speaking with conviction, though he couldn't make out the specific words. Mrs. Henderson approached James during the meeting, her usually cheerful face creased with worry. "In all my years here," she whispered, "I've never seen the family called together like this for something involving young George. He's always been such a thoughtful child, but this feels different, more serious." When the doors finally opened, the family emerged with expressions that suggested they had reached some kind of resolution, though not without difficulty. Prince William's face showed the strain of a father supporting his son's decision, while worrying about its consequences. Catherine appeared proud but protective, staying close to George as they walked. Prince George himself looked relieved, but also slightly overwhelmed by the gravity of what had just occurred. He had the appearance of someone who had crossed an important threshold, still a child, but one who had just taken a significant step toward adulthood through the weight of his decision. The afternoon brought an unexpected request. Prince George asked to speak privately with James in the castle gardens. This was highly unusual. Private conversations between royal family members and staff were typically formal and brief. But there was something in the boy's manner that suggested this conversation would be different. They walked slowly through the gardens where James had first noticed the prince's troubled state just yesterday. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness that contrasted sharply with the serious nature of their discussion. "Captain Morrison," Prince George began, his voice steady despite his young age, "I want you to know about the decision I've made, because it might affect you and the other guards." James listened carefully, maintaining his professional demeanor while recognizing that this moment was unlike any in his 15 years of service. The young prince was about to share something significant, and James sensed that he was being honored with a level of trust that went beyond normal royal guard relationships. "I've decided to step back from some of my royal duties," George continued, his words measured and thoughtful, "not permanently, and not because I don't understand my responsibilities. But I need time to grow up as just George, not always as Prince George. I need to make mistakes and learn from them without every decision being analyzed by the entire world. The simplicity and wisdom of the statement struck James profoundly. Here was a 12-year-old boy who understood something that many adults struggled with, the need for authentic personal development even within the constraints of extraordinary circumstances. I know this will disappoint some people, George continued, and I know it might change how security works around me. That's why I wanted to tell you personally. You've always treated me with respect, not just because you had to, but because you saw me as a person. I want you to know that this decision isn't about rejecting my future responsibilities. It's about preparing for them properly. James felt a surge of emotion that caught him completely off guard. In his military career, he had served with honor and distinction. In his royal service, he had maintained the highest standards of professionalism and dedication. But never had he been moved the way he was moved by this young prince's courage and wisdom. "Your Royal Highness," James replied, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "It takes tremendous strength to make a decision like this. You're showing the kind of leadership that comes from understanding yourself and your principles." Prince George smiled then, the first genuine smile James had seen from him in days. "Thank you, Captain. That means more to me than you know." As they walked back toward the castle, James realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of duty and service. This 12-year-old prince had just demonstrated a level of integrity and self-awareness that would guide James's own decision in the hours to come. That evening, James found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror of his quarters within the castle grounds. The red uniform that had once filled him with pride now felt heavy with the weight of contemplation. Prince George's decision had stirred something deep within him, a recognition of courage that demanded an equally courageous response. The more James thought about the young prince's choice, the more he understood its profound significance. George wasn't running away from responsibility. He was claiming the right to grow into it authentically. At 12 years old, he had demonstrated the kind of moral clarity that many adults never achieved. He had chosen difficult honesty over easy compliance. James had always believed that true service meant protecting not just the physical safety of the royal family, but their dignity and well-being. Today, he had witnessed Prince George protect his own dignity by making an incredibly mature decision about his personal development. The boy had shown that real strength sometimes meant saying no, even when yes would be easier. Sleep came fitfully to James that night. He dreamed of his own childhood, of the decisions that had shaped his path to this moment. He remembered joining the military not for glory or recognition, but because he wanted to serve something greater than himself. He thought about the oath he had taken when he became a royal guard, to protect and serve with honor and integrity. By morning, James knew what he had to do. The realization had crystallized during the quiet hours before dawn, bringing with it a sense of clarity that was both peaceful and overwhelming. Just as Prince George had found the courage to make a difficult but necessary decision, James now faced his own moment of choice. The protocol for what James was considering was virtually unprecedented. In the modern era, royal guards typically served until retirement or requested transfer to other duties. Resignation in response to a gesture of respect for a royal family member's decision was uncharted territory. But James understood that some moments transcend protocol. Some actions speak louder than words, and some forms of respect can only be expressed through sacrifice. Prince George had sacrificed the easier path of simply accepting expectations without question. James felt called to make his own sacrifice in recognition of the prince's courage. During the morning briefing, James studied the faces of his fellow guards. They were good men, dedicated professionals who shared his commitment to service. But James sensed that they didn't fully grasp the significance of what Prince George had done. They saw it as a minor adjustment to royal scheduling, not the profound act of self-determination that James recognized it to be. After the briefing, James requested a private meeting with Colonel Richardson, the head of royal security. The colonel was a veteran officer who had served the royal family for over 20 years. He had mentored James when he first joined the Royal Guard and had become not just a superior officer, but a trusted friend. "Colonel," James began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I need to discuss something with you that I've never had to discuss before." Colonel Richardson looked up from his papers, immediately sensing the gravity in James's tone. "What is it, Captain?" "Sir, I've been deeply moved by Prince George's decision yesterday. The courage and integrity he showed in choosing his own path, even when it was difficult, has made me reflect on my own service and what true respect means. The colonel leaned back in his chair, his experienced eyes studying James's face. Go on. I believe that the highest form of respect I can show for Prince George's decision is to step down from my position, not because I disagree with his choice, but because I want to honor it in the most meaningful way possible. He chose to prioritize authentic development over easy acceptance of expectations. I want to choose meaningful gesture over comfortable routine. Colonel Richardson was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected request. James, you're one of the finest guards I've ever had the privilege to command. Your service record is exemplary, and the family trusts you completely. Are you certain this is what you want to do? James nodded without hesitation. Sir, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Prince George showed me what real courage looks like. He made a decision based on his principles, knowing it would be difficult and potentially controversial. I want to make my own decision based on my principles, and my principle is that such courage deserves recognition through action, not just words. The colonel stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard where James had first noticed Prince George's troubled state just 2 days ago. This is highly unusual, James. It will raise questions and require explanations that go far beyond normal protocol. I understand, sir. But some things are more important than protocol. Prince George taught me that yesterday. Colonel Richardson turned back to face James, and there was something approaching admiration in his expression. I've served this family for 20 years, and I've seen many acts of duty and dedication. But I'm not sure I've ever seen anything quite like what you're proposing. It's either completely admirable or completely mad. James allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps it's both, sir. But I know it's right. The colonel returned to his desk and pulled out a form that James recognized as a resignation request. If you're determined to do this, we'll need to handle it properly. Your service has been exemplary, and this decision doesn't change that. In fact, in its own way, it confirms it. As James filled out the paperwork that would end his 15-year career as a royal guard, he felt not sadness, but a profound sense of rightness. He was honoring Prince George's courage in the only way that felt adequate, through his own act of principled decision-making. News of James's resignation request spread through the castle, with the quiet efficiency that characterized all royal household communications. By afternoon, every staff member knew that Captain Morrison had submitted his papers, though few understood the reasoning behind his decision. The reaction was a mixture of shock, confusion, and deep respect for a man who had earned the admiration of everyone who worked alongside him. Mrs. Henderson was among the first to seek out James, finding him in the guards' quarters as he began the process of organizing his personal belongings. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and her voice carried the weight of genuine affection. Captain Morrison, she said softly, I've heard about your decision. I won't pretend to understand it completely, but I want you to know that in all my years here, I've never seen such dedication to doing what you believe is right, regardless of personal cost. James paused in his packing, touched by her words. Mrs. Henderson, Prince George showed all of us what courage looks like. I'm just trying to live up to his example. Other staff members approached throughout the day, each offering their own version of respect and bewilderment. The kitchen staff had prepared his favorite meal without being asked. The groundskeepers had gathered flowers from the garden where he had walked with Prince George. Even the newest recruits to the Royal Guard spoke to him with reverence usually reserved for decorated war heroes. But it was the reaction of his fellow guards that affected James most deeply. These men had served alongside him through countless official functions, security alerts, and routine duties. They understood the pride and dedication that went into royal service, and they recognized that James's decision represented something extraordinary. Sergeant Williams, who had served under James for 8 years, approached him during the evening shift change. Captain, I need you to know that what you're doing has made me think about what service really means. I've always thought it meant following orders and maintaining protocols. But watching you these past few days, I'm starting to understand that sometimes the highest form of service means making difficult personal choices based on your own moral compass. The conversation with Sergeant Williams revealed something James hadn't anticipated. His decision was inspiring others to examine their own understanding of duty and honor. Several guards mentioned that they had never considered how personal integrity could enhance rather than conflict with professional service. As word spread beyond the immediate castle staff, the reaction became more complex. Some senior officials questioned whether James's resignation was appropriate, suggesting that it might set a problematic precedent. Others, however, saw it as exactly the kind of principled action that reinforced the best traditions of royal service. Prince William requested a private meeting with James the following morning. The encounter took place in the same blue drawing room where Prince George had announced his decision just 2 days earlier. Prince William's manner was serious but warm, reflecting both his role as a future king and his humanity as a father. "Captain Morrison," Prince William began, "I understand you've submitted your resignation in response to my son's decision to step back from some of his royal duties." "Yes, Your Royal Highness," James replied, standing at attention but meeting the prince's eyes directly. "I felt it was the appropriate response to honor his courage." Prince William was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "James, may I call you James?" "What my son did took tremendous strength and maturity, but what you're doing takes a different kind of courage. You're sacrificing your career to make a statement about respect and principle." James felt the weight of the moment. "Your Royal Highness, your son taught me that sometimes the most important decisions are the most difficult ones. He chose authenticity over expectation. I'm choosing meaningful gesture over comfortable routine. I want you to know that Catherine and I are deeply moved by your decision. We're also concerned about you. You're giving up a career you love and excel at. Have you thought about what comes next?" James had thought about it, though not in practical terms. His focus had been entirely on the rightness of his decision rather than its consequences. "I haven't made specific plans, sir. But I know that whatever I do next, it will be informed by what I've learned from your son about the importance of staying true to your principles." Prince William stood and extended his hand, not in the formal manner of royal protocol, but as one man acknowledging another's integrity. "James, you've served our family with distinction for 15 years. This decision doesn't diminish that service. It completes it in the most honorable way possible." The handshake lasted longer than protocol would normally dictate, and James understood that he was being honored not just for his years of service, but for the courage of this moment. That afternoon, Prince George sought out James one final time. The boy found him in the rose garden, sitting on the same bench where their conversation had taken place just days earlier. George approached with the quiet confidence that had marked his recent transformation. "Captain Morrison," George said, "I heard about your decision. I need you to know that it means everything to me." James looked at the young prince, seeing in his face a maturity that went far beyond his 12 years. "Your Royal Highness, you inspired me to understand what real courage looks like. Thank you for that gift. Will you be sad to leave?" George asked, his voice carrying genuine concern. James considered the question carefully. "I'll miss the honor of serving your family, and I'll miss watching you grow into the leader I know you'll become. But I won't be sad, because I'm leaving for the right reasons." Prince George nodded solemnly, then surprised James by stepping forward and offering his hand for a formal handshake. "Thank you, Captain Morrison, for showing me that adults can be just as brave as they expect children to be." In that moment, James understood that his decision had achieved something he hadn't anticipated. It had given Prince George confirmation that his own courage was recognized and valued by someone whose opinion mattered. The news of Captain Morrison's resignation reached the media 3 days later, though the palace had tried to handle the matter quietly. When reporters learned that a decorated royal guard had resigned specifically to honor Prince George's decision to step back from certain duties, the story took on a life of its own that no one had anticipated. James found himself at the center of a media storm that he had never sought and was completely unprepared for. Reporters gathered outside his modest flat in Windsor, calling out questions about his motivations and trying to understand this unprecedented gesture of respect. He declined all interview requests, maintaining the discretion that had characterized his entire career in royal service. The public reaction was swift and divided. Social media erupted with debates about duty, sacrifice, and the meaning of true service. Some people criticized James's decision as unnecessary drama, arguing that he was drawing attention to himself at Prince George's expense. Others saw his resignation as the most noble gesture they had ever witnessed, a perfect example of how respect should be demonstrated through action rather than words. Television news programs featured panels of experts debating the implications of James's decision. Royal historians noted that they could find no comparable precedent in modern royal service. Military analysts discussed the code of honor that might drive such a decision. Child development specialists praised the positive message it sent about supporting young people's autonomy and self-determination. But it was the letters that moved James most deeply. They began arriving at his home by the dozen, then by the hundreds. People from all walks of life wrote to express their admiration for his decision and to share their own stories of times when they had faced difficult choices between personal comfort and principled action. A retired teacher wrote, "Your decision reminded me of why I became an educator in the first place, to support young people in becoming their authentic selves, even when it's difficult." A young mother shared, "Reading about what you did gave me courage to make a difficult decision about my own child's education. Sometimes protecting the people we care about means making sacrifices that others might not understand." A veteran wrote, "I served in Afghanistan and thought I understood what honor meant. Your resignation taught me that honor isn't just about following orders. It's about recognizing when someone else's courage deserves to be honored in return." The letters revealed something James hadn't expected. His decision had resonated far beyond royal circles, touching people who saw in it a reflection of their own struggles to balance duty with conscience, loyalty with principle. Meanwhile, within the royal household, James's resignation had sparked conversations about the nature of service and respect that went to the very heart of what the monarchy represented. Senior advisors found themselves re-examining long-held assumptions about protocol and precedent, recognizing that James's action had exposed gaps between formal procedures and authentic human response. Colonel Richardson visited James at his home, bringing with him a formal letter from the palace. "The Queen herself asked me to deliver this," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine amazement. The letter, written on official royal stationery, was brief but profound. "Captain Morrison, your 15 years of exemplary service have been a credit to the Royal Guard and to the values we strive to uphold. Your recent decision to resign in honor of Prince George's courage has demonstrated that true service sometimes requires personal sacrifice. While we accept your resignation with regret, we do so with deep respect for the principles that motivated it. Your action has reminded us all that the highest form of loyalty is not blind obedience, but thoughtful support for those we serve, even when that support comes at personal cost." James read the letter 3 times, understanding that he was holding not just royal acknowledgement, but royal validation of his decision. The monarchy itself was recognizing that his resignation represented the best traditions of service rather than a departure from them. The most unexpected response came from other members of the royal protection teams. Guards from various locations began requesting meetings with James, wanting to understand how he had found the courage to make such a decision and what it meant for their own understanding of their roles. During one such meeting, a young guard named Thomas asked, "How did you know it was the right thing to do? How did you overcome the fear of giving up everything you'd worked for?" James considered the question carefully. "I think the fear was still there," he admitted. "But I realized that Prince George had faced his own fears when he made his decision. He could have taken the easy path and just continued with expectations, but he chose the harder path of being true to himself. When I saw that kind of courage in a 12-year-old, I knew I had to find my own courage to respond appropriately." These conversations revealed that James's decision had initiated a broader dialogue about the evolving nature of royal service in the modern era. Guards were beginning to see their roles not just as protectors of physical safety, but as supporters of the royal family's well-being in all its dimensions, including their right to authentic personal development. A week after his resignation became public, James received an unexpected phone call. Prince George himself was on the line, calling with his parents' permission to thank James personally for the support his decision had provided. "Captain Morrison," the young prince said, his voice carrying new confidence, "I wanted you to know that what you did helped me feel less alone with my decision. When I saw that someone I respected so much understood why I needed to step back, it made me feel stronger about the choice I made." The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it confirmed for James that his sacrifice had achieved its intended purpose. It had provided Prince George with validation and support during a crucial moment in his young life. 2 weeks after James's resignation, an unexpected opportunity emerged that would give new meaning to his sacrifice. A private foundation dedicated to supporting young people's mental health and personal development reached out to him, having been deeply impressed by the story of his resignation and its underlying message about respecting young people's autonomy. The foundation, established by a group of child psychologists and education specialists, offered James a position as their director of youth advocacy. The role would involve working with young people who were struggling to balance external expectations with their own sense of identity and personal values, essentially the same challenge that Prince George had faced, but in different circumstances. "Your resignation demonstrated something we've been trying to teach for years," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the foundation's founder, during their first meeting. "That adults can show respect for young people's difficult decisions through meaningful action, not just words. We believe your experience and your demonstrated commitment to principle would be invaluable in this work." James found himself drawn to the opportunity in ways he hadn't expected. After 15 years of protecting the royal family's physical safety, the chance to protect young people's emotional and psychological well-being felt like a natural evolution of his service mindset. His first case involved a 14-year-old girl named Emma, whose parents wanted her to attend a prestigious boarding school that would almost guarantee admission to Oxford. Emma, however, had discovered a passion for environmental science and wanted to attend a different school with a stronger focus on sustainability and field research. The conflict was tearing the family apart. As James sat with Emma and her parents, he found himself thinking about Prince George's courage in choosing his own path despite expectations. "Sometimes," James told the family, "the bravest thing a young person can do is ask for the space to become who they're meant to be, rather than who others expect them to be. And sometimes the bravest thing parents can do is support that request, even when it's frightening." The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. James discovered that his years of reading people and situations in royal service had given him unique skills for understanding the complex dynamics between young people and the adults in their lives. More importantly, his own recent experience of making a difficult principled decision gave him credibility with young people who were facing their own moments of choice. Meanwhile, the impact of James's resignation continued to ripple through royal circles and beyond. Several other royal protection officers had requested transfers to positions that aligned more closely with their personal values and interests. The palace had begun reviewing policies about staff development and career satisfaction, recognizing that motivated, fulfilled staff provided better service than those who felt trapped in rigid roles. Prince George's own journey was progressing as well. Reports filtered back to James through mutual contacts that the young prince was thriving in his modified schedule, showing increased confidence and engagement with his remaining duties. The breathing room he had requested was allowing him to develop his own sense of identity, separate from royal expectations, which in turn was making him more effective when he did participate in official functions. The media coverage of James's resignation had also sparked a broader cultural conversation about how society responds to young people's requests for autonomy. Parenting experts began writing about the Prince George effect, the idea that sometimes supporting a child's difficult decision required adults to make difficult decisions of their own. 6 months after his resignation, James received an invitation that surprised him completely. Prince George, now 13 and noticeably more confident, had requested permission to visit the foundation where James worked. The visit was arranged as a private learning opportunity, allowing the young prince to see how other young people navigated the challenge of balancing expectations with authenticity. During the visit, Prince George spoke with several of the foundation's clients, listening to their stories with the same thoughtful attention that had always characterized his interactions with people. James watched from a distance, proud to see how the prince's own experience of making a difficult decision had increased his empathy for others facing similar challenges. After the formal part of the visit, Prince George asked to speak privately with James. They walked through the foundation's garden, reminiscent of their conversations in the Rose Garden at Windsor Castle. "Captain Morrison," George began, then paused and smiled. "I suppose I should call you Mr. Morrison now," James laughed. "James is fine, Your Royal Highness." "James, then. I wanted you to see this work you're doing because I think it's connected to what happened between us. You honored my decision, and now you're helping other young people make their own decisions. It's like the courage is spreading." The insight was remarkably perceptive for a 13-year-old, and it made James realize something he hadn't fully understood before. His resignation hadn't just been a gesture of respect for Prince George. It had been the beginning of a new form of service that was potentially more impactful than his previous role. "You're right," James replied. "Your courage taught me something about what real service looks like. Sometimes serving others means making space for them to become who they're meant to be, even when that's difficult or uncertain." Prince George nodded seriously. "Do you think other adults will learn the same lesson?" James looked at the young prince, seeing in him not just the future king he would become, but the thoughtful, principled person he was already becoming. "I think you've started something important, Your Royal Highness. When young people see that their courage is respected and supported, they find more courage. And when adults see that supporting young people's difficult decisions can lead to positive outcomes, they become more willing to take their own risks in service of what's right." The conversation revealed to James that his resignation had been part of a larger pattern of courage and authenticity that was expanding far beyond its original context, touching lives in ways he was only beginning to understand. 1 year after his resignation, James received an invitation that brought his journey full circle. Prince George, now 14 and preparing for his next phase of education, had requested that James attend a small ceremony at Windsor Castle. The invitation was handwritten by the prince himself, and its personal tone suggested something significant was about to occur. The ceremony took place in the same rose garden where James had first noticed the prince's troubled state 2 years earlier. A small group had gathered: Prince William and Catherine, Colonel Richardson, Mrs. Henderson, and several other staff members who had been part of the original story. The setting was intimate and meaningful, chosen specifically for its connection to the events that had brought them all together. Prince George, now noticeably taller and more confident, stood before the group with the poise of someone who had grown comfortable with making important statements. His voice was clear and strong as he began to speak. 2 years ago, I made a decision that was difficult but necessary for my personal development. I needed space to grow into my future responsibilities authentically, rather than simply accepting them without question. That decision was supported by my family, but it was validated by someone whose opinion meant a great deal to me. The prince turned to look directly at James. Captain Morrison, James, showed me through his actions that courage deserves to be honored with courage. His resignation was a gift to me, but I've come to understand that it was also a gift to everyone who heard the story. He demonstrated that real respect sometimes requires personal sacrifice, and that the highest form of service is supporting others in becoming their best selves. James felt emotion welling up as he listened to the mature, thoughtful words coming from the young man who had once sat alone in this garden, wrestling with a decision that seemed too large for his 12-year-old shoulders. Today, Prince George continued, I want to honor James's service and his sacrifice with an announcement of my own. I've decided to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting young people who are making difficult decisions about their futures. The foundation will be called the Morrison Initiative, and James has agreed to serve as its first director. The announcement took James completely by surprise. In the year since his resignation, he had found deep satisfaction in his work with the Youth Advocacy Foundation, but he had never imagined that his story would inspire something of this magnitude. Prince William stepped forward, carrying an official document that bore royal seals. The Morrison Initiative will be a collaboration between the royal household and private donors who were inspired by your story.
James, it will provide resources, counseling,
and support for young people across the Commonwealth who are navigating the challenge of balancing expectations with authenticity. Catherine added, Your resignation taught us something important about how adults can support young people's development. This foundation will institutionalize that lesson, ensuring that other young people receive the kind of validation and support that you provided to George. Colonel Richardson, James's former commander, stepped forward with something James recognized as a military medal case. James, your service to the Royal Guard was exemplary, but your service to Prince George transcended normal duty. This is a special commendation approved by Her Majesty, recognizing exceptional service to the Crown through personal sacrifice for principled reasons. As James accepted the medal, he realized that his resignation had achieved something far greater than he had ever imagined. What had begun as a simple gesture of respect for a brave young prince had evolved into a movement that would help countless other young people find the courage to make their own difficult but necessary decisions. Mrs. Henderson, tears streaming down her face, approached James with a leather-bound book. This contains letters from young people all over the world who heard your story and found courage to make their own difficult decisions. Your resignation gave them permission to believe that adults would support them, even when their choices were challenging. The book was thick with hundreds of letters from teenagers who had found strength in James's example to pursue their own authentic paths. A young artist who chose art, school over law school despite family pressure, a teenager who came out to religious parents, a student who chose community service over corporate success. Prince George approached James one final time, carrying a small, wrapped package. "This is from me personally," he said, his voice carrying the warmth of genuine friendship. "It's not official or formal. It's just from one person to another who understands that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage." James unwrapped the package to find a simple compass, engraved with the words, "For finding true north when the path is unclear." As the ceremony concluded and the small group dispersed, Prince George asked James to walk with him through the gardens one more time. They moved slowly through the same paths they had walked 2 years earlier. But everything had changed. "James," Prince George said, "I need you to know that your resignation didn't just honor my decision. It taught me what leadership really means. A real leader doesn't just make brave decisions for themselves. They create space and support for others to make their own brave decisions. That's what you did for me, and it's what I want to do for others." James looked at the young man walking beside him, seeing in him not just a future king, but a leader who had learned early that true power comes from empowering others. "Your Royal Highness, you've already done more to support other young people than most adults accomplish in a lifetime. The foundation will help thousands of young people find the courage to be authentic." Prince George smiled, and James recognized the same determination that had marked his decision 2 years earlier. "We started something important in this garden, James. I want to spend my life making sure it continues." As they reached the fountain where the prince had once sat alone with his difficult decision, James realized that his resignation had not been an ending but a beginning. It had planted seeds of courage that were now growing into something that would outlast them all. A legacy of respect for young people's wisdom and support. For their authentic development, the circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. What had started as one prince's quiet decision and one guard's gesture of respect had become a movement that would touch countless lives, proving that sometimes the most important changes begin with a single act of courage, honored by another act of courage and growing into something larger than anyone could have imagined.